With the NBA trade deadline coming up, there's a ton of moves that could be made. Let's get into some that I think may happen. With the NBA trade deadline approaching, there's a ton of teams that want to retool their roster and prepare for the playoffs, while there's also a bunch of teams who are not going to make the playoffs and want to be sellers at the trade deadline. For this first trade scenario, that's exactly the case. It's been pretty widely reported that PJ Tucker probably would be on the move, and the Lakers are one of the teams that really need him and would want to acquire him. Tucker will be an absolutely perfect fit for the Lakers. He's a great defensive player. Although he's old, declined a bit, he's still a really good defensive player, and he could also knock down threes, which would help the Lakers significantly. The Lakers wouldn't have to give up much in order to get PJ Tucker, probably just a second round pick, maybe a bench player along with that, but they wouldn't really have to give up that much to get him. And the Rockets have made it pretty clear that they would be willing to deal him, so I could really see a deal like this getting done by the trade deadline. The Lakers need a guy like PJ Tucker, and the Rockets aren't going anywhere, so they would be more willing to trade a guy like him for a second round pick. So it's just a matter of time until this happens, I think. Now for the next trade scenario, this trade would be a little more tricky. But similar to the PJ Tucker situation, Victor Oladipo is also on the Rockets, and the Rockets are definitely sellers this offseason. And with Oladipo's contract expiring after the season, and he's made it clear he wouldn't re-sign with the Rockets, I think the Rockets are kind of forced to trade him at the trade deadline. There's been reports that a ton of teams would be interested, like the Knicks, Heat, and Warriors, but out of those three teams, I think the Warriors would be the most likely to acquire him. Kelly Oubre has been a guy who's been in trade rumors ever since he got to the Warriors, so I think a guy like Kelly Oubre would be a perfect player to put in a Victor Oladipo trade package. I feel like a pretty fair trade would be a deal of Victor Oladipo, some role player like Brad Wanamaker or someone like that, and probably a protected first round pick. I think that deal is pretty fair for both sides because the Warriors are getting a guy in Victor Oladipo who's a great scorer and that would help their team make the playoffs potentially. And for the Rockets, I think they're getting a pretty good player in Kelly Oubre, who's also really young and he's more years under his contract. And as I said before, I don't think the Rockets would be able to re-sign Oladipo anyway, so to be getting a guy in return like Kelly Oubre who could help them going forward, I think would be a really good deal for them. And also to get a late first round pick would also help for their rebuild. The Warriors have been having issues whenever Curry comes off the court, and I think if the Warriors acquired Oladipo, that would help them a lot with scoring especially. The Warriors are already in the playoff hunt, but if they got Oladipo, I think they would push them over the top and make them get into the playoffs. There would be a few risks though for the Warriors that they would have to look at, and the first thing would probably be his injury history. If the Warriors were going to trade for a guy like Oladipo, they would definitely want to repay him and want to re-sign him to a pretty big deal, and he's been showing that he has been pretty injury prone over his career, so that's something the Warriors would definitely have to take into account. But if the Warriors feel comfortable with Oladipo's injury history, I think fit-wise he's a pretty good fit for the Warriors, and this deal makes sense for both sides, I feel. Another deal that I think would happen before the trade deadline would be Kyle Lowry traded to the Sixers. There's been a ton of reports that the Raptors want to trade Kyle Lowry, and the Sixers are his hometown, and they've also been interested in Lowry. And there's also been a ton of reports that Lowry has went around and told all his teammates that he's going to be traded from the Raptors. It seems like Lowry getting traded is pretty likely at this point, but we'll see what happens. Another team that's interested in Lowry is also the Clippers, along with some other teams. So there definitely will be competition for the Sixers if they want to acquire Lowry. I feel like a fair trade for both sides would be if the Sixers were to give up Tyrese Maxey, which is a young, nice player they have, along with a 2021 first-round pick, and on top of that, they would probably have to give up another first-round pick. And also, I think a guy like Danny Green and Terrence Ferguson would be also nice additions for the Raptors to have. From the Raptors' perspective, I feel like it makes a lot of sense because they're getting a young point guard that they can develop because they have a great coaching staff, and they could definitely still compete for the playoffs this season, and they'll also get guys like Danny Green who could spread the floor and shoot the three well for them. And for the Sixers' perspective, they're getting a really good player in Kyle Lowry who has great leadership and also has won a championship and can teach the Sixers young guys like Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid how to win. And this season the Sixers have been amazing, and it seems like they may finally be figuring it out. And to add a guy like Kyle Lowry to potentially push for a championship, I think is a pretty good move for them. It seems like the Kyle Lowry experiment in Toronto is basically over at this point, or it seems like it is. So I think that would be a pretty good move for both sides to make. Another deal that I think makes a lot of sense, but I don't think there's been too many reports about it, would be a guy like Buddy Hield going to the New York Knicks. Buddy Hield has been a really productive player for the Kings, but for whatever reason, he always finds himself in trade rumors. And pretty recently, again, he's found himself in trade rumors that the Kings would be willing to trade him, and they're taking calls for him. I think a team like the Knicks especially would be a great team to go after him, just because they really require shooting, and they don't have that much shooting on their team, and they've been really good this season, especially defensively. So spreading the court out would really help guys like RJ Barrett and Julius Randle. There's been a ton of reports that the Knicks are looking at a big fish to acquire, but I think a guy like Buddy Hield would be a great player for them to get, just because he's a pretty young player and they can add him to that core, and he's a great shooter, which they need, obviously. The Knicks could offer young guys like Frank Ntilikina and Kevin Knox, and they also have a ton of draft picks they can involve in that, probably a first-round pick and maybe 2 second-round picks on top of that. I'm not really sure why the Kings seem like they want to trade Buddy Hield so bad. He's been really productive for them, but if they were willing to trade him, I think this would be a decent deal for them. They get some young guys who've been okay in the league, and they also get some draft picks to go along with that. I personally think the Kings should keep Buddy Hield. I think he's a really good young player that can play in this league for a long time, and especially with his great three-point shooting, he'll be great for the new NBA. But it seems like the Kings want to trade Buddy Hield for a while now, so maybe this would be the deal that would get it done. But what do you guys think? Do you think any of these trade scenarios that I laid out actually have a chance of happening, or do you think there won't be too many deals at the trade deadline? But anyways, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you guys enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps me out a lot. Until next time, peace out, guys.